Hi, everyone. Carter Krishna here for Beyond the 90. I hope everyone's surviving the cold weather that we've had throughout the country uh, as well as you can. Want to talk about the Vancouver Whitecaps and the potential of them relocating after the 2026 season. And I think those of us who follow USL closely and followed NASL closely before that, in my case, worked in NASL, realize the most likely destination for a relocation of a club in North America would be Indianapolis, as MLS has made no secret of their desire to take out Indy 11, take out Ursal, in spite of investing well over $100 million into that club. Only in America can that happen, where because of our closed league system and our system of governance, that, well, actually could happen in Canada also. Only in North America could it happen, where you could invest the amount of money Ursal has invested in the 11 and see that wiped out. Have a women's club, have a great academy, have a first team that averages 9 or 10,000 people a game, which is a lot for the United States, particularly at the lower division level. So here's what's happening with Vancouver. The lease situation at BC Place, they did get a one-year extension. Their lease technically ended at the end of the 2025 season, which saw Vancouver very close to winning the MLS Cup. They were the better team in that final against the Fort Lauderdale-based Inter Miami of Lionel Messi. But Messi Magic carried Inter Miami over the line. The Whitecaps have a lot of structural issues, and I should preface this or give a disclaimer here that when I was hired to work as the NASL's communications director in late 2009, it was the Whitecaps organization that in particular went to bat for me. The Whitecaps were part of NASL. Now, they were already moving to MLS for the 2011 season, but they didn't have any intention of playing the 2010 season in USL. They had actually already affiliated themselves with the NASL, and I have a great deal of fondness for the organization. Perhaps owe my role as the comms director at NASL partly to that organization and how they liked my resume and they liked how my ideas for the job. And at the time, there was the potential that they were going to leave a team behind in NASL, maybe in Victoria or maybe somewhere on the west coast of the United States. They did not do that. So they moved to NASL in 2011, renovated BC Place, or moved to MLS in 2011. And BC Place was always kind of a clunky setup. And absent the sort of transformation that we saw at Providence Park or PGE Park, whatever it's called now in Portland, they were always going to run into trouble. And the Whitecaps are a club that's been up for sale effectively for 2 years. There were 30 to 40 groups apparently that have looked at the financials, and not one of them has wanted to pursue the purchase. And it's a club that takes home maybe as little as 12 or 13% of their match day revenue, which is by far the lowest in MLS. So, Axel Schuster said, the CEO, the situation is untenable. Those are his words. So here is why Indy, I think, is in play now. Indy is essentially waiting for a team because of Mayor Joseph Hochstadt's posture and staking his political capital starting 2 years ago on MLS and cutting the floor from under Ursal and Indy 11. And we know that Indianapolis is arguably the strongest USL market that MLS would like to be in. Now, the largest exclusive market to USL, depending on what metric you use, is either Phoenix or Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is, of course, a former MLS market. MLS was there for 6 years. It's the only market, I believe, in the country currently, as I think offhand, that MLS has been in and is no longer in. But they're not going to go back there for it's very unlikely to go back there. So Phoenix, I think there are questions about Phoenix, just in general, as a soccer market and as a sports market. I think Phoenix Rising's done a great job, but I think there's questions about that market. I think Indy is the most live market for MLS, other than Sacramento, where they have had complications, right? Sacramento was basically in MLS and fell out. Never played a game in MLS, but they were basically, they had cleared all the hurdles, it felt like. The Sacramento situation is very unique. And so MLS goes to San Diego instead, which is working out really well so far. So this is, Hogsett has staked his reputation on this. Obviously, Senator Todd Young, the Republican senator from Indiana, has met with Commissioner Garber very, very openly. I don't blame Senator Young for that. I don't think he wanted to make it this public thing. I think MLS wanted to make it a public thing. Because MLS has paused at 30 teams, I think relocation, and we could be talking about relocation of Montreal also in the future, maybe potentially relocation of one or two of the U.S.-based clubs also as time goes on. But I think Vancouver and Montreal, not because of the market per se or the lack of success of the club. They're very successful, right? They've held the MLS banner high in CONCACAF too. And winning the Canadian Championship, among other things. It's these other issues. I think in terms of Montreal, Mr. Saputo is a man I know from my NASL days as well, and I just don't think they've gotten the support there from the business community. There isn't. Montreal hasn't bought into the idea of MLS as a from a sponsorship profile, from a business community standpoint. They just. They have other issues, which we see in Chicago, we see in Boston, we see it's not exclusive to Montreal. I think Montreal is a flippable asset potentially, but we'll worry about Montreal later. We're talking about Vancouver specifically. Unlike Vancouver, where we don't know what's going to happen with the stadium, Indy is already secured the land. Talked about funding a stadium district. They have access to public money and a site. They may just need the club. They may just need an MLS club. And the potential is that you could see, while the stadium gets built out in Indy, the Whitecaps, with a new name. Whitecaps is not a name that would apply to Indianapolis, be as crazy as Utah Jazz or Los Angeles Lakers. But heck, the NBA kept those names, which make no sense. The Lakers are called the Lakers because they're from Minneapolis, land of 1,000 lakes. So Vancouver Whitecaps, who have a logo also based on the Whitecaps and the colors of the Pacific and crossing the Lionsgate Bridge. That's kind of the contours you see of the waves from the bridge and the mountains. They would have to change their logo. They would have to change their name. So, could this happen? I think it's very possible. I don't know that it's likely. I'm not sure MLS wants to necessarily lose Vancouver as a market. Montreal is a different issue. Montreal has never really bought into MLS, and Montreal is a team, the Impact, that were drawing capacity crowds in USL and capacity crowds in NASL before that team moved to MLS. And they still draw kind of close to capacity crowds in MLS. The stadium attendance is higher. But you could argue if the stadium had been 18,000 when they played in my league, in NASL, or they played previously in the USL First Division before that, those of you who are newer to the sport may not remember the USL First Division and the USL Second Division, which are effectively, just to make it simple, the equivalents of the USL Championship and USL League One now. There was a merger between those divisions to become USL Pro when Vancouver, Montreal, North Carolina, or was called Carolina at the time, became North Carolina FC, Carolina Railhawks, and a few other clubs left the USL First Division. Miami FC, not this Miami FC, a previous Miami FC. That Miami FC became the Miami FC we're talking about, became the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. They'd already relocated to Fort Lauderdale by the time they jumped from USL to NASL, but they had not changed the name yet. They hadn't rebranded yet. Those clubs and a few others, Rochester for a period of time, and then they went back to USL, broke off and started the NASL. So then USL Pro was a merger of League One and USL Division One and USL Division Two. All these acronyms get confusing. So USL Pro sat on the pyramid, so-called pyramid of North American soccer below NASL and below MLS. So they were a third division in and had clubs in both the United States and Canada. And same thing with NASL was sanctioned in both countries. So Montreal always drew well. Didn't matter what league they were in. And you could argue they might have been caught up in the tumult and the soccer wars of lower divisions if they had stayed in and maybe eventually forced into the Canadian Premier League. But I'm not sure their move to MLS has paid off financially. Vancouver's did initially. But now we're looking at something different. So this is particularly for Indy 11 fans. I think it's really imperative if you want to save your club and you want to keep organic football and grassroots football alive, that you go out there and support Indy 11. Brickyard Battalion, go out there and support Indy 11 this season. And perhaps it's a market that can have an MLS club and a USL club. I don't know. I mean, this is the same equation. I'll tell you some of the thinking in NASL. I had left the league office by the time the situation with Minneapolis-St. Paul came up with Minnesota. But when MLS started sniffing around, knowing they wanted to be in Minnesota, which is where we always wanted to be in Minnesota. There's a reason why we owned that team and managed that team for 2 years. And I had a closer relationship with that club than any other club other than my home club of Fort Lauderdale, because we knew that was such a critical market in terms of the right demographics for soccer, in terms of the mix of people, kind of the social attitudes of people there, and then also the corporate clientele for sponsorships you could get. MLS saw the same thing a few years later. So they were going to go into Minneapolis-St. Paul regardless. And Bill McGuire, the owner of Minnesota United, had to make a decision. Do I fight this? Do I fight Ziggy Wolf, who now owns Orlando City, but at the time, obviously, was the Vikings owner, was going to put a team in potentially an MLS team in that same stadium the Vikings play in. Do I fight this, or do I try and co-opt it and talk to MLS myself and give a different stadium plan, maybe a more soccer-specific stadium plan rather than a multi-use facility? And McGuire made that decision. Now, with Ursal, who has put a lot more into Indy 11 than Bill McGuire had put into Minnesota United at the time, a lot more financially, a lot more in terms of his heart and soul, what does he do in this position? I mean, my hope is that people in the Indy area rally to Indy 11. But I'm not naive, okay? I'm not naive. I'm not naive when the local paper calls Indy 11 a minor league team and mocks them and says, oh, this would be great for the city. I'm not naive to what most people think, but I do think there is a scenario where you can save that club if this situation plays out. And that's part of the reason I'm making this video now, because I'm concerned that that this may catch people off guard when the move happens, or when people get wind that a move might happen. I'm jumping the gun here, I'll admit that. I'm reading a lot into the Vancouver situation and making an assumption that they could be in Indianapolis in 2027 or 2028. Maybe they negotiate a series of one-year leases at BC Place until the club is sold and relocated. But I think it's best to deal with the potential reality of this at this moment. So that's my thinking.